Welcome back, welcome back. On Sunday, Venezuelans will go to the polls to vote on a referendum on constitutional reforms proposed by President Chavez. If approved, the president will have the power to declare a state of emergency for an indefinite period and suspend the right to information. In addition to that, he will be eligible for re-election for the rest of his life. Even though officials argue that the reforms mean devolution of power to the people or a move towards a new model of development, recent opinion polls suggest that the referendum could be the closest contest that Mr. Chavez has faced so far since he became president in 1999. Joining me today from Caracas is the Venezuelan American attorney, Eva Golinger, and from Washington, D.C. is Jose Miguel Vivanco from Human Rights Watch. Let's start with you, Jose Miguel. Do you think that this is a way of President Chavez trying to transform Venezuela into a dictatorship, to abrogate freedom of democracy in that way?
Well, not yet, but these constitutional reforms are going to seriously undercut fundamental freedoms and human rights in Venezuela. If this amendment is eventually approved, in terms of a state of emergency, the president will have the discretion to declare a state of emergency and to renew that and extend the emergency without control of parliament and without judicial control. And he will be able to suspend fundamental due process guarantees as well as freedom of expression. And that obviously it creates an environment for abuses and undercut the principle of the rule of law as well as basic institutions of a democratic regime.
Right. Well, let's, at that point, Jose Miguel, go across to Eva, who does not agree with that. Yes?
Yes, that's correct. Well, for one, I think it's important for those viewers to understand that during the Chavez presidency, this article has existed, Article 337, which is what Mr. Vivanco is referring to, which is what part of this controversy is about. This state of emergency or martial law 1, which is an area of regulation that's a norm in most countries around the world, that in a time of crisis or catastrophe, there's always the possibility that a government can impose martial law. However, during the Chavez administration, since 1998, he has never once imposed martial law or state of emergency, despite the fact that we've had coups d'etats and all kinds of destabilization attempts. That's important because in governments prior to Hugo Chavez, they invoked this concept all the time, very frequently throughout the prior 40 years. In any case, I think what's also important to mention about the reform in that article in particular in 337 is that it in fact increments the amount of rights that will be respected that cannot be violated during states of emergency, such as the right to against forced disappearance. Of course, the right to not be held incommunicado is still maintained in that article. The right to personal integrity, that cannot be violated. The right to a jury of one's peers, as well as the right to not be condemned to more than 30 years of prison. So, I mean, those factors aren't mentioned by, for example, groups like Human Rights Watch, that in fact the reform is increasing the recognition and the guarantee of human rights during times of states of emergency, but also all the time. Because remember, that article is very specific to just states of emergency. The reform is 69 articles that are increasing and amplifying human rights in the country, including, for example, an article that will prohibit discrimination for sexual orientation purposes, which is actually revolutionary, very progressive in terms of all constitutions around the world, that would be included in a constitution.
A strong comeback there from Eva. What's your response to that?
Well, actually, the Constitution, the amendments include some specific rights that should be protected even under the state of emergency, and we acknowledge that. But we are very concerned with the specific rights, like, for instance, the presumption of innocence, the right to against self-incrimination, the right to be judged by an independent court, the right to a fair trial. Those kind of fundamental elements of due process are not, unfortunately, protected under the amendment. And what the intention of the legislature here has been to expand the powers of a president, to eliminate controls. In the past, for instance, the president was under the constitution created by Chavez in 1999. He was forced to consult and seek the approval of the assembly every 30 and 90 days to keep extending the state of emergency. At this point, it will be up to Chavez to establish whether the emergency ceases or whether he will continue ruling the country under state of emergency.
Eva, what do you think would happen if, in fact, President Chavez loses this referendum on Sunday? What would he do?
Well, I mean, the government has made it very clear that they'll respect whatever result that you know, we have on Sunday, as long as, of course, all the democratic rules are obeyed. And you know, this has been a consistent issue with sectors, not all of the opposition, but sectors of them that, for example, have already said, in fact, this week, that if the reform passes, that they'll consider that that's fraud. I mean, that's kind of a very ridiculous statement to make. You know, that's not a very democratic type of position to take. So, I mean, I think that the government obviously has said that they will definitely respect whatever the result is, as long as there's no violence, destabilization,
right,
or fraud played out by any of the sectors.
We've got to step in there. Both of you have got more to say. We'll give you a chance to say it in future weeks. Thank you very much indeed. We're right at the end of our time. And thank you both to Caracas and to Washington. Now from Venezuela to Russia's parliamentary elections, where the pro-Kremlin party, United Russia, is set for a political landslide at this Sunday's polls. President Putin is once again at center stage as the first serving president to openly campaign for a political party in parliamentary elections. To discuss all of this, I'm delighted to be joined by Oksana Antonenko from the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome. Let's start with an explanation of what exactly President Putin will get out of this election in terms of a position for himself.
Well, these elections, of course, are much less about, you know, choosing between various political parties to be represented in the parliament. It is quite clear that United Russia is going to take, you know, overwhelming majority, maybe even become a one-party parliament, but it is quite unlikely. I think there will be a couple other parties like Communist Party or maybe Zhirinovsky's Liberal Democratic Party. But what is importantly is that this elections has really turned into a referendum on President Putin himself, because of course he is looking for the way, you know, continue his legacy after the presidential elections in March, where he still claims he intends to step down, and therefore he is decided to head this party list, although he is not a member of the United Russia Party. Neither is he intending to take the seat in the parliament.
Is he not intending to take the seat now, but when he steps down as president, could he pick up the seat then?
No, he can't. According to the law, he can't. I think he has to either step down as the president and then campaign and run in the parliamentary elections to take the seat. The parliament will be formed, of course, before he has to step down as the president, you know, before the nomination of his formal successor, which we expect to happen sometime after the elections in mid-December or end of December.
So what is your expectation of what he will do when he steps down as president?
Well, I think the decision has not yet been made by him personally either. I think there is still a great degree of uncertainty. What appears, I think, likely that he wants to continue and he wants to remain kind of the ultimate national leader and decision maker on strategic issues in Russia. It is very hard to keep this position unless you are actually the president, because the executive authority under President Putin has now accumulated so much power that whoever takes over formally as the president is unlikely to tolerate somebody else, you know, above him you know, become a national leader. So he is really very much in a dilemma. If he wants to step down and just be nominated as some sort of, you know, national leader or the head of the Security Council or any other position, he is really at risk that his successor, no matter how close he is to President Putin now, can at a certain point just challenge that and remove him in the future, and he certainly will be able to do that.
And what about United Russia? I mean, are these elections free and fair, or has there been a lot of violence, low-level violence?
Well, I think these elections are not free and fair if we look at these elections from the point of view of the Western democratic system. But of course, Russia is not a Western democracy, and the elections are very much a veneer over what essentially is not really a democratic system of governance. It is very much authoritarian, kind of mild authoritarian system where the executive authority very much, rules without any real systems of checks and balances. There is no free press. The media is fully controlled by the state. There is no really local governance that is elected. All the governors are now appointed by the president. There is no civil society which is able to counterbalance. There is no independent parliament. So therefore, I think within this system, of course, these elections very much fit within the trend. Now, they are kind of as they are, not simply because the authorities want to manipulate that. I think it is very much a reflection on the Russian society as a whole, which really does not want to have a democratic governance, who are very happy with this authoritarian trend and who are very traumatized by the events of 1990s, and therefore United Russia is popular, and therefore many Russians are happy to go along with it.
And of course the relations between Mr. Putin and the West have got tighter, tenser and so on. And there's Mr. Lugovoy, accused of the murder of Mr. Litvinenko in London, who is running in this particular election.
Yeah.
What's the future for relations with the West and Britain at the moment? And what's the future for Mr. Lugovoy?
Well, I think for Lugovoy, my prediction is that it is very likely he's going to be elected. He is number 2 on the party list of Mr. Zhirinovsky, and it looks like Mr. Zhirinovsky is going to clear 7% threshold to be in the parliament, which means automatically that Lugovoy will be in the parliament, which of course will mean that the chances of him being extradited will be even less than 0. But the elections...
They're already 0, and they'll be less than 0. And a word about relations with the West.
I think the relations with the West will continue to worsen. I think Russia today is very much inward-looking. And the fact that Putin has played on this very anti-Western rhetoric in his election campaign really shows that he, intends to continue to challenge the West. And for the West, it is a big challenge, really, how to deal with these elections. Because, of course, many Western institutions think it is not fully democratic, but they would have to recognize it as legitimate. And it is very, very clear that it will be harder for the West to deal with Russia after the elections as well.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for giving us a great overall view. And that's about it for this week. My thanks to all my guests. Do join me again in 7 days' time for another Frost Over the World. Until then, goodbye for now.